Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Chess Olympiad 2024 edition. This is the Olympics chess. That's why it's called the Olympiad. Groundbreaking information. And all the countries are going up against each other. Now, yesterday, I started covering this fantastic event on this channel, and we already had some fantastic storylines. I said fantastic twice. I will try not to say it again for the rest of the recap, where we saw this fantastic clip of Magnus on a bicycle, late, 30 minutes, and ultimately winning the game. Today, sadly, he was on time, so we're not going to get any viral news. But there was some other adventures. Somebody had a SIM card on them, and that apparently classified as a forfeit, even though I don't really get it. Then something happened with the team of Seychelles. I was like looking at on Reddit chess, losing in 5 moves, resigning on move 1. I don't know. But we've got really exciting chess, and I also do just want to say I have a second channel. Like 400,000 people watched this recap yesterday. Y'all didn't check out the second channel. I'm uploading there too all the other games that are not in contention for first place, but are huge upsets, like 2000s beating Grandmasters and so on. So there's too many games to cover. I'm going to try to cover the games there as well. I'm going to be uploading other stuff to that channel also, like stuff about the World Chess Championship and so on. So, yeah, Gotham 2. Check it out. Now, let's talk Olympiad. This game, Norway. This round, Norway is playing against
Slovakia?
Yes, Slovakia. And their board 1 is Victor Gazik. I like his name because it reminds me of like mineral water, like Gazi water. Gazik. Anyway, Magnus opens with d4, and unfortunately for his opponent, he arrived on time. Gazik plays knight to f6, c4, e6, and Magnus plays knight f3. Here, Gazik surprises me because really about 8 out of 10 games now will proceed with d5, and white can play the Catalan. And I imagine Magnus would have played the Catalan, although I have no idea. The Queen's Indian is old news. It's not a bad opening, but engines have sort of proved different ways for white to get the advantage. And now we get bishop b4 check, which is called the Bogo Indian, because there's a lot of Nimzo Indians and Queen's Indians. This is called Bogo Indian, or as I like to call Bozo Indian defense, because this is not that good. It's, you know, white just plays knight bd2 or bishop d2, but knight bd2 is nice. And basically white's like, dude, you want the knight. I mean, I'm going to attack the bishop. That's sort of the point. Historically here, black is castling, or black is playing some sort of like C and D pawns. Gazik plays b6, so the idea is simply to quickly put the bishop on the b7 square. I just had to respond to a message. And a3, bishop d2, and here a surprising move. Here, Magnus takes with the knight. Now, Magnus could have taken this bishop with 4 different pieces. I think we can automatically discard the king. Because if you take with the king, you're just worse after knight e4 check, probably. Although the most insane thing about the position is it's actually just kind of equal, because knight e4 is not even that great. Now, you just go king e1, and even though you've lost the right to castle, there's really not any easy way for black to take advantage of this, and white will just play like h4, you know, like put the king here. It's kind of funny. Queen d2 and bishop d2 both make sense. Queen d2 is possible. You can then put the bishop on b2. You can also put the queen on f4. But he takes with the knight, which is a very odd decision, because why would you do that? Like, now you have to go this way and you lose, you know, where the knight stands. But the idea is quite simple. The idea is that you want to play e4. So if black were to castle here, I think white can even already consider playing the pawn immediately to the e4 square and just getting a big center. Bishop b7, bishop d3, e5, castle, just fantastic position for white. So Gazik plays bishop b7. And so some of you who were watching the recap yesterday might remember the game Lodici versus Aguirre. And in that game, white went e3 and then bishop d3 and gave up the pawn on g2. And we actually have the exact same situation here, where taking on g2 is possible for black. And actually, it's the move that the computer wants to play, because otherwise white is getting away with something. Like, white's not supposed to play chess like this. And so Magnus is tempting his opponent into taking. That's not really for the faint of heart, I gotta tell you, because then white is gonna play b3, Black is going to go d5. Magnus is going to play bishop e2. And I mean, it's just a matter of time. You can feel your nervous system crumbling. You know, you play c5, suddenly the guy is opening up the bishop, right? Then a queen f3, and this is the way you lose. So instead of that, Black plays d5. And so Magnus castles, and he gets away with it. He gets away with this kind of position. Now, from this point forward, we are going to show you the difference between the greatest chess player of all time. I don't know who the hell we are. Maybe me and this coffee are going to show you. That's the one that this is the one that I finished one. So we're not going to show you the difference between a really, really exceptional chess player like Gazik, who's 25-60 FIDE. I mean, I'm better, but, you know, no, I'm just kidding. And Magnus Carlsen, right? Both guys have the Grandmaster title. This game is almost a thesis statement for why it is worth considering adding separate titles for people who are like over 2750 or something. But not everybody is a big fan of that. Just watch. So Black plays DC, natural move. You want to open up your light squared bishop, knight c4. Magnus has one more pawn in the center, so he has one more center pawn. The trade opens up his c-file. He has the bishops, so he obviously wants to open up some lines. Let's see what happens. Also, he's stronger on the dark squares because he has a dark squared bishop. Black is stronger on the light squares because he has 3 pieces that can fight for the light. So watch the game. Okay, queen d5. First of all, Magnus has to not hang mate in 1. I like how he gets an exclamation point for that move because Game Review doesn't know if he's Magnus or like 400. Game Review is just like, f3, good move. If it's Magnus, he would have been like, why'd you even take 90 seconds on that move? I don't really know what else he could have played. Maybe he wasn't even at the board. So f3, rook d8, and now bishop 2e2. Okay, interesting move, bishop e2. Why bishop e2? Why not queen here? Well, Black wants to play c5 and put pressure on the bishop. So bishop e2 prevents c5 because actually if you do that, I'm going to take. Now Black has to take with a pawn. Can't take with the queen because you lose your rook. And you can trade, but then we can make this trade, and this is actually a losing position for Black. Completely losing. White goes here, activates the bishops, weak pawn, and Magnus will eat you alive here. Well, he'll eat you alive anyway. So knight c6. Now Magnus gets out of the way completely. Now Black has lost the option to play c5. So Black brings the rook, and in a distant future, he would like to go up. Now, another thing Black is doing is playing very slowly. Obviously a sign of nerves. It actually began as early as move 6, as the opponent spent 7 minutes putting the bishop on b7. He spent 18.5 minutes castling. It's a sign of nerves. I've been there. I've never played Magnus in a classical game, but like the guy spent 10 minutes on every single move, right? He was sort of frozen a little bit. And again, he might have not been nervous. He might have been thinking about a bunch of brilliant things, like what he's going to eat, what kind of goulash he's going to eat in Budapest that evening. But it is a sign of the nerves because now you make it into a middle game and you're down, 30 minutes on the clock. Magnus playing b3. Computer doesn't like this move. It wanted him to centralize the rook first and then play for b4. It actually wants him to be a little bit more active. But now we have b3. By the way, 14 minutes on that decision, right? There's a lot of things to consider here, like the immediate b4. Maybe you don't go b4 right away because you're worried about b5, followed by a5, and suddenly Black is creating a little bit of counterplay, and you're not really in a position here to call the shots. Like you play bishop d2, it looks good, but suddenly knight takes d4, and the illusion of your position is very clear. It looked really solid, but it's actually not. So Magnus plays b3, keeps it chill. Black plays b5, so he goes for counterplay, but now knight b2. But see, now Magnus never gave his opponent a pawn target, and c5 is a weakness. So when you play b5, the knight is going to reroute and probably go to c5. So Black tries to quickly create counterplay before that is able to happen, but Magnus is so sharp, he plays knight d3 anyway. And I think Gazik was relying on b5 and e5 to kind of catch up in this game, but knight b2, and you still go to d3, and you don't care that he can take like this. Why? Because after e takes d4, obviously you're not going to take and allow your opponent to do this. You're going to play e4. So you created the pawn wall against the bishop. You opened up the dark squared bishop. And even though you are down a pawn for a moment, this is a completely dominant positional advantage. It's actually really hard to understand how good the position is here for white. But this is engine inspired. This is engine inspired. Like I would like to believe that Magnus here learned from some of the neural networks which understand that the temporary giveaway of a pawn still lead you to a very substantial advantage as long as you negate the activity of your opponent's pieces. And black's pieces have no forward mobility here. For example, you can play bishop f4 even to prevent anything to go to e5. Black doesn't have a forward move. And if you don't have a forward move with the pieces, and the other guy does, yeah, it's bad news, because then it's going to be a very quick return on investment, and you're going to get everybody back. So very instructive. Knight b2, knight d3. Black reconsiders. You see he spends half of his remaining time trying to go for e4, and I get it, but now this will always stay alive, and Magnus still gets the knight to c5. And the position is completely lost now for black. He has to go for the sequence. He has to sacrifice his knight on d4 and play queen takes d4. But this is not a hanging rook. It's just not, because if you take it, first of all, the bishop is just free, and then you get your queen trapped. Rook a2, queen a2, rook a1. It's just trapped completely. So, very brutal tactical sequence, and here a very nice touch. Taking back with the pawn. Not taking back with the bishop, because if you take with the bishop, actually in some lines, I can take your rook, and your rook here no longer has any protection. So for example, bishop f3, gf3, this actually is now a hanging rook. And rook f3, well, this is back rank, right? And, oh, actually, this is pure back rank, by the way. So, yeah, very nice g takes f3, and yeah, now suddenly the harrowing reality sets in that you are just down a piece with black. You are down a piece, you have 2 extra pawns, but unfortunately in that skirmish, you also opened up this. And Magnus, bishop g5 is actually not the best move, by the way. Rook b1 or rook a2 are, but he plays bishop g5. And here black has to go knight to g4, bishop d8, leave the bishop there, and threaten a checkmate. And Magnus would have had to find bishop d1, rook d8, and queen e2. And he's still better, but black actually has some weird counterplay here. And it leads to a really obscure sequence of only moves. But again, practically speaking, yeah, black has 4 minutes to respond, and he plays rook d5. And that leads to bishop f6, queen f6, centralization of the knight, and white is just up a knight. Queen c1, rook g1, queen centralizes, hits the rook in the pin to the back. You take a pawn for good measure, and rook d1. The threat is mate, the threat is mate. And this is not just a mate, it also picks up a bishop. So here black resigned. A very smooth game from Magnus, who played a very solid queen's pawn positional game. Knight d2, baited his opponent early, who didn't take the bait, which led to Magnus having a slightly better position. And a very nice maneuver here with b3, knight b2, knight d3, sacrificing a central pawn to create that blockade. Very engine-like idea. Just shows how humans can learn from the engines. Here he had to be very sharp with his calculations. Everything was sharp, everything was good. Bishop g5 was not the best move, but you know what, as a human being, I think we'll take it. There was some obscure engine defense, and Norway takes down Slovakia. Their board too had a very tense game, Johann Sebastian Christensen, but there are adventures left, right, and center. There was a crazy adventure, and this game is like an anime. This game is like an anime. In 2009, Vasil Ivanchuk, and by the way, Ivanchuk might be the best player to never become the world champion. He has beaten more world champions than anybody else, but he's never been world champion himself. So in 2009, or 2008, I think 2009, Ivanchuk played Wesley So. Wesley So was a teenager at the time. I think he was 16 years old at the Olympiad. And Ivanchuk lost to him and announced that he was going to retire from chess. Evidently, he hasn't retired, but maybe from that level of competition. 15 years ago, he lost to a teenage Wesley So. Now he's older. He's, 50 plus. I think he's 50 or 51. I have no idea. But he's, for chess, he's a little bit older. And now he's playing Wesley, who Wesley is on the, the dream team. Team USA, like how they show up to the Olympics with their basketball team. Yeah, here they're very much the same. This time we have a Nimso Indian. Can Vasil Ivanchuk avenge, and can Ukraine beat USA, even though the United States outrates them on every single board? So d5, knight f3, dc, queen c4. This is a very, very solid line. Wesley playing super solid chess. Bishop a6, queen a4. Queen goes back to c2, c5. All of this has been played 1.5 million times. Rook d1, queen e7. Queen a4 is the move here that Ivanchuk chooses. Black takes, and now h4. Wow, h4. That's exciting. A lot of deep and interesting ideas here. Rook h3 potentially is an idea. Another idea to be maybe h5 and h6. Also, you can play e3, take with the king, put the king here, etc. Just positional game. Wesley plays c4. This cuts the queen from going anywhere there. It also blocks the bishop, but, you know, you could potentially trade on the c file, activate the rook. Ivanchuk plays rook h3. That was his idea. Now Wesley attacks the bishop. And Ivanchuk says, take it. Take my bishop. Wesley's like, you know what? Honestly, I'm good. I don't want to take it. Knight bd7. Taking the bishop is a little bit too dangerous. You can take it, but then you have to give up the knight. You have to protect your king. If you move, it's just mate. Queen h7, right? So Wesley decides I'm not gonna get into all that. And now knight t4, and actually Ivanchuk is losing. Ivanchuk playing a little bit too creatively. Here, the computer gives g4 to just go all in completely. But black is also in time with counterplay here. And bishop b7 and hitting the knight. And I mean, yeah, the engine, I don't know. It gives some really fascinating lines here. But yeah, we have knight d4 instead. And after bishop b7 and the bishop retreating, Wesley now begins taking over the game. He can take over the game here by playing knight c5 and ideas like knight to d3 with a rook on this file. He plays a5, which is preventing white from moving the bishop to b4. f3 and bishop e3, right? Like, and c3. Wesley's just in time. He's creating counterplay on that side of the board. I don't even know how Ivanchuk's going to get an attack going. The bishop is here, right? We have rook on g3, but where's the backup? So it's not very clear where the attack is. And now the best move here for black, believe it or not, is to keep the queen on the board and the lines open. I think Wesley here wanted to not take any risk, so he simply took and sent the game closer to an endgame. But now his advantage is also gone. His advantage was in the fact that he had queens on, and white was not too developed with a king stuck in the center. But not having any development with a king in the center doesn't matter that much when there's no queens on the board. But e4 is again an inaccuracy from Ivanchuk, and I mean, he's just slightly worse here. Bishop b2, rook c5, fine. Ivanchuk's still playing some aggressive chess, right? He wants to play g4, g5, and he also wants to bring the rook back. Wesley puts the knight on c4, so very principled. Both guys have about 10 minutes on the clock. But as you can tell, like, Wesley's trading the knight for the bishop. He's just playing very simple, very straightforward. Ivanchuk plays a4. Wesley goes rook a3, rook b6, rook d8. And likely we're just heading for a draw. Wesley plays g6. Guys are going to make a couple more trades. The position is just hovering around equality. g5. Wesley even finds knight takes e4. Absolutely beautiful move, sacrificing the knight. We have g takes h6. Wesley takes. You sacrifice the knight, but white is just simply going to lose all his pawns. Right? He's just going to lose all his pawns. He doesn't have enough pawns to win this game. Knight d4. Rook a2 check. The king goes up. Game is headed for a draw. And suddenly, you're like, wait a minute. Rook e2? Rook b7. And there is no way to defend the f-pawn. And if the f-pawn moves, it's mate on the back rank. And it's not clear what was overlooked after knight f3. The only way to survive here is to play king g7. Bring the king back. If rook b7, black has counterplay with the e-pawn. So instead of that, if you play, like, let's say, rook d7 to try to play rook b7, that's the best move. King f6, rook b7, e5, rook f7, like, and you get out with your king and you try to create some counterplay. But already it's quite dicey, and Wesley goes down on the second time control, just gets his king swarmed, and he's just losing. Rook h8 is mate. g5, h5, out of nowhere, his king is in a mating net. Rook h8 is coming, and Wesley so resigns, and Ukraine takes down Team USA. On the last board, Anton Korobov defeated Ray Robson. That was a very smooth game by him. Very nice game. And this was a wild game because, I mean, it was heading for a draw. It was a relatively equal position. And, you know, Wesley found knight takes e4, but he didn't have to do this. He could have played takes, and knight h7. He would have been completely fine. But he went knight e4. He sacked the knight. And, you know, it was fine. It was still completely reasonable. He took the pawn. Oh, here there's this. But even this is probably a draw because you have... But, I mean, there was no way he could have lost. And Wesley loses. And Ivanchuk avenges himself from 15 years ago. Maybe now Wesley was going to say that he's going to retire. So, Team USA goes down. Ukraine is perfect. Now, here we have a battle between Serbia and India. And, yeah, the Indian team have been monsters in this Olympiad. Gukesh is cooking. Yesterday, Erigaisi won a really, really nice game, which I didn't have a chance to actually see because I saw the match was over, but I didn't see that game. There's a bunch of games you guys were telling me about that game. Yeah, well, you know, if I didn't cover one game, there's going to be another one. So here against the ready, we get knight c6 and bishop f5. We have a reverse Jobava London. I've played this with black, but I'm fascinated to watch how a 2778 rated player plays this. And by the way, I'm cheering for Erigaisi because Indic is a good grandmaster, but every time I play Indic online, he plays a4 or h4 against me, and he beats me. I think he's trying to embarrass me when we play. So I have little sibling syndrome, and I'm like cheering for big brother Arjun Erigaisi to show up and embarrass Indic, because Indic always tries to embarrass me, right? So that's sort of like... So let's see how it unfolds. Bishop f5, bishop g2. Already the embarrassment begins. He's threatening knight c2 in case he doesn't see it. Knight a3, and now e6, and your knight gets booted back to the center. And basically, black just plays this very provocative system, and it's up to white to prove if he has something. So the bishop goes to e4, f3, bishop g6. He takes his bishop, and he takes the center. But Erigaisi wanted this. You understand? Like, you play like this with black because you want to give your opponent something to play for so that he has to take a little bit more risk. He has to take some liberties. So the knight goes to f6. Bishop g5. Knight c2 here, also totally reasonable. Bishop g5, the bishop goes to e7. And now he takes on f6. And this is what I don't understand. Against the top level guys, these grandmasters sometimes do things I can't explain. Why did he give up his bishop? I suppose he was primarily looking at bishop f6 and he wanted to target this pawn somehow, maybe with his f-pawn, like maybe queen b5 ideas. I'm not sure, knight c2, knight e3. But Erigaisi takes with the pawn, and apparently now is just better. So whatever opening he chooses, this plan that Indic goes bishop g, it's not the best plan. And that's what he gets for trying to play like he does against me in Title Tuesday. Apparently the best plan was to play knight c2, knight e3. But okay, bishop g5 is what he chooses. So how does Erigaisi go from this, which is like relatively boring and relatively equal, to outplaying his opponent? Knight c2. Well, here comes knight a5. So he's not castling. He targets the queen, improves his structure, light squares versus the light squared bishop. Then he puts his knight on c4 and asks white what's he gonna do. White plays b3 because if he had castled, which does look quite natural. Black can even castle himself, and let's say you go h4, it looks like you have a very... Actually, black's attack is just way faster. King b1 looks completely fine. Queen b5. Right? Mate, discover check, you lose. So black's attack is very quick, which is why b3 is played. Arjun walks the king, right? He's going to put the king on g7. Knight e1. But first, he's going to start attacking the queen side. Queen a5. Knight goes to f5. b4. You see white is pushing, but that's leaving holes in the position. f4. Now we attack those pawns with a5. Very nice idea. Now we put the rook in the center. It's very rare to see Erigaisi down on time. He's generally the one that plays very fast. Knight goes to d6 here. Now he puts a bunch of his pawns on the light squares, and the knight is going to come to the center when it's ready. First, we're going to keep attacking. We're going to wait for the moment. Rook a2. Rook a8. Indic very fast, by the way. He plays super, super quickly. But I think it's just a matter of time. Rook a4, slow and steady improvement, tripling on the a file. Look at this. Guaranteed infiltration. And here, just a blunder, knight b5. And there's just no way to protect your center. Rook b3. And you get a brilliant move. Knight takes c3. Bishop takes d4. And rook a1. Look at that. That's falling. The queen is falling. There's a fork. Beautiful game from Erigaisi. Arjun Erigaisi's 4 out of 4 in the Olympiad, and his live rating is 2,785. 2,785! He's the number 4 ranked player in the world, behind Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, and Hikaru. Hikaru's second, Fabi's third, like 2802. And Erigaisi. What? And he's not even playing for the World Championship. Gukesh won also, by the way, he's like 2770. Now I'd like to show you a very fun game. This was on the women's Olympiad. Sabrina Vega, who was at a tournament that I was playing at. She wasn't in my section, but we were both in the GM Invitational. Mongolia beat Spain, but she did something very cool. This was a 4-knight Sicilian, a very theoretical line with bishop e2. Don't worry about it. White sacrificing a pawn, black not accepting. Black still not accepting. Black clearly, by the way, in prep. Look at black's time management. Not even thinking. Now, finally, black spent some time. You'll notice that black's light scored pawns around the king indicate that there could be some weaknesses. Yeah, there will be some weaknesses. Just keep an eye on that position, all right? So rook e7, you know, white makes some nice improvements here. b3, everything good. White takes on f4. And in this position, white's winning. White's up a pawn and the position is dominant, but it's not exactly clear how you're going to win the game. Sabrina Vega here. Watch what she does. Plays queen e3. Plays queen e5. And she goes king g3. And she goes queen f6. And king f4. And this is like the legendary the king walk. Look at that. That is crazy. Look at that. Queen g6 is a threat because of the pin. And she sacks the rook. She doesn't sack the rook, actually. That's just epic stuff. Epic stuff from this position. Like, how do you win, right? I mean, how do you break through? Of course, you can use your pawns. She notices that she actually needs to use the king. King g3, king f4. I mean, look, that is rare in chess that you get to pull that off. Absolutely dominant game. And she was the only one on her team that won, unfortunately for Team Spain. But Team Spain in the Open is 4-0. They've won every single match. The host nation, Hungary has a great team. They have a very, very balanced lineup. They have Rapport, who's a beast. They have Leko, who's a legend. They have Shugirov, who's Russian, but either moved to Hungary or represents. I mean, I'm assuming he has to live there. He moved there in the last few years for obvious reasons. And then their board 4 is Gladura. So they actually also have a very balanced team, very good team. And they played Italy. Italy just pulled off an amazing upset over the Netherlands. But, you know, at some point you do run out of steam. Shugirov here plays an absolutely fantastic Sicilian. Bishop d7, king b1. Sonis, I think, misplays. He played a Najdorf, but bishop d3 is this some sort of new trendy line, and he didn't respond, I think, in the most principled way. He played a little bit too slowly, which allowed white to execute the perfect attack. I actually think h4 and then bishop h6 is correct, but we got bishop h6. And even though it wasn't perfectly executed, the attack is still there. And black has to be super, super careful here. He tried to play his best. At this point, he needs to bring the queen to try to kick this queen out. He doesn't do that. And yeah, Shugirov is not going to let it go. G4 and the attack for white here is just simply too powerful. Black not understanding the danger. He trying to trade, but, you know, and actually queen d2 is not even the best move. You know, h5 and then queen d2. But again, it's very subtle. And yeah, Shugirov... Knight e5 already just a pure blunder. Queen h6 back, and hg is devastating. So I think because he had just retreated, black sort of fell asleep at the wheel. But the position is, yeah, and I mean, Shugirov wins in 20 moves. It's rare that a 25-50 GM loses like this, but I don't think he ever truly felt comfortable in the position. I think he was doubting himself from the very beginning. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, this is not the position that he wanted. Because now you're sort of playing like a dragon Sicilian, except you're under a huge attack and you don't have any of the counter shots. So probably he thought he was in trouble for a while. Shirov wins, and Hungary takes down Italy. And one of the biggest shocks of the round was Vietnam. Vietnam outrated, I think, by Uzbekistan on every board, every single board. This is board 3 or 4 for Uzbekistan. I think it's board 3. And it's Sindarov with the black pieces versus Tuan Minlay. I've played both these guys online. Tuan Minlay is a... we just saw him lose to Magnus in the Speed Chess Championship early rounds. I have to respond to another message. Okay. So we saw him lose to Magnus Carlsen in the Speed Chess Championship, but he's been a very strong player for a very long time. We get a typical Catalan. He likes his kind of Catalan structures. And here, if black plays perfectly in the opening, he can generally equalize. She can generally equalize. In the case of Java here, he can generally equalize. But it's always annoying. The Catalan is one of the most annoying openings in chess. C3, BC3, and castles. This line has been proven. If black knows like 17, 18 moves like perfectly, he can hold. So we have C4. Black goes bishop d7. So far, so good, but spending a lot of time. Bishop b2, rook d8, knight d4. And I mean, as you can see, like white is just going to pressure forever. And it's always unpleasant, always unpleasant. Knight goes to b5. Black goes e5. That's not the best move. The best move is b6. And then bishop e8. Black goes e5. And it's not clear if liberating the light squared bishop is a benefit or a detriment. Rook c1. He plays knight e8. h4 is a common idea. There's also c5 to try to put the knight on d6 in some lines. f6 chosen. So we're hovering around equality. It seems like black is equalized, but dude's got 5 minutes on the clock. And this is like the struggle of playing against the Catalan, is that even if you equalize, it's not over. There are still many questions being posed. Rook c1, bishop f7. Now the position's exploding. Black has 3 minutes. b6. Tuan Minlay goes back. And there's generally a good rule of thumb, even my coach says, right? My coach says, don't take a strongly placed piece out of the center of the board. Knight e3, maybe instead we play something, okay, but knight e3 takes. Okay, now here comes the knight looking for the light squared bishop. Black has 1 minute on the clock. Both guys have to make it to the 40th move. And suddenly, Sindarov starts spinning out of control, losing the position, losing the grasp completely, and knight to f5 from the top rope. Knight f5. You ask, what's the point? Why did black resign? Because after pawn takes, knight takes f5, black has 2 retreating moves. He could come forward, but then he loses the rook. And whichever he chooses. Rook g3, rook g8, and knight e7. If king f8, rook g3, rook g8. And black is completely lost and resigned the game here. And Vietnam took down the gold medalists. Uzbekistan. So US losing, Uzbekistan losing. Crazy stuff going on in this round of the Olympiad. Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland led the way. He had a tough game, but Poland ultimately in first place. There's a lot of teams tied for first right now. It's going to open up as it continues. Norway is close. They had 3 wins and 1 tied match. But it's the Olympiad. You know, things are going to get interesting as the games progress. Hopefully Magnus arrives an hour late. Hopefully we get some more exciting stuff. I will cover some big upsets and games that are not in contention for medals on the second channel, Gotham 2. I'll put a link in the description. That's all I have for you today. All right? Big wins. Magnus unstoppable up to 28-35. Again, playing some inspired chess. Some big wins by some teams that are outrated on every single board. So, hope you're enjoying the coverage. Get out of here.